and welcome to the Choose Happiness podcast. I am so excited for you to meet my guest today. She's a person who you meet, and within 5 minutes, you're like, I just want to listen to this person for the rest of the day and all day tomorrow, too. The amount of knowledge and intelligence and awareness and utter coolness is, I just can't believe it's all inside this one brain. She's a university professor, international lecturer, immersive program creator and leader, also internationally, film and literature historian, francophile writer, podcaster, mom, wife, friend. She does it all, and magnificently. Coming to us from Santa Monica, California, here is the illustrious and the amazing Courtney Spikes.
Oh my gosh, Rachel, I need to record this and listen to it every morning when I wake up. That's fantastic. I love it.
Thank you so much for
Listening
being
to the
here.
list, I'm exhausted.
I'm sure.
Because I think I'm like a lot of other moms out there. Like you've maybe had a career or in a career or going to a career, or you've got kids and you're volunteering and there's things that are interesting to you. Like I think we all juggle so much stuff. That when you actually list it or say it out loud, you're going, oh my God, what was I thinking?
Right, exactly.
But like you, I think we do walk towards things that bring us joy or happiness. So like when you sign up to volunteer, it's because you're excited to like meet other parents or help out or, participate in your kids' schools. So you feel like you're part of a larger community, or you have a job. Hopefully that's something that brings a passion or something that brings you happiness, or you have some other activities you're doing that sort of pop up. Like podcasting would be a thing at this age in my life. I love it.
Yeah, it's
I'll do it
so
every day if I
true.
could.
Well, you're very good at it. And speaking of, you've been a professor and a lecturer at many universities across the country. And according to your online reviews, which I did
Uh-oh.
check,
Oh,
your
God help me.
students consistently call you, quote, the best teacher I've ever had.
I
And my
paid that one.
favorite, my
I have a
favorite
false student account.
teacher
I fill
ever.
all this out.
No, it's all true. My favorite teacher ever, exclamation point.
Oh,
So, can you
wow.
please share what is your teaching philosophy and how does it differ from, I feel like the way you and I grew up was memorize, regurgitate, take the test, etc. How are you different from that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. First of all, thank you to those students that actually like went to the trouble to write something nice. That's fantastic. Because there's bad reviews out there too, because, you get students at one extreme or the other,
Mm,
and I think that's true, like in work, in school, like anything you do, you have those people that you sort of connect and have synergy with. Right. And so I feel like I've been very fortunate to have a lot of really amazing students pass through my door, and I get to engage with them in creative and historical ways. So I'm
mm,
really grateful for that as well. Um, so I think the difference for me was I didn't come straight to history. I actually worked in nonprofit for many years, and I ran an AmeriCorps program that was teaching kids how to read in neighborhoods or parts of school districts that needed support.
mm,
And that really challenged my own notion of how learning happens. What are the factors that produce opportunities for learning, things that are not equal in our society? And how can we make it possible for all different types of learners to grasp content, gain mastery, and go forth on their own? And so when I
mm,
approached graduate school and teaching in my later years, right, I wasn't right out of college. I'd worked for almost a decade before going back to grad school. I had a different outlook on what education meant. And I'd sort of been in the trenches a little bit. And I think I applied that to my style.
mm,
And I think one of the things that I love to do with my students is to engage them in history in a way that is interesting to them personally.
mm.
Because history is a different, let's put it this way, history in the 21st century is different than how history is perceived in the past. No pun intended.
Right.
Right, because I started teaching before the invention of the iPhone.
Mm.
Let that sink in for a
Mm.
minute. I started teaching before the invention of the iPhone or a smartphone. We don't
Uh-huh.
want to do any branding here.
Right.
The sum of all human knowledge is in your hand.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the amount of content that has exploded over the last decade in terms of educational content that is free and readily available, like you can topic. You can do it with a serious lecturer. You can do it with a cartoon animation for, the history of the world in 5 minutes. You can do a
Mm.
history of dance, whatever it is you want to do. So it's all available. So the content and the information is out there in a different way than when I began teaching. So I had to completely revamp how I approach it with my
Mm.
students. And I had to shift from being sort of a purveyor of content and helping them to gain mastery, which was a fun way to do it, to how can we navigate all the content that's out there? How can I help direct students in a way that makes it feel connected to their interest or their understanding of the world today? And every generation that changes, right?
Oh, of course. Right, right.
So they have a different perspective about what's going on in the world around them, and they have a different perspective of what history means to them and what is relevant. This is a
Mm.
very long-winded way to answer this question. I
No, no,
think the
please,
short answer
please
would
keep going.
be I teach history in a way to try to help students make it relevant for them. How do we make the past relevant for students today? Right. And you have to connect with them and what's interesting to them or what's important to them today. So I never teach the same class. I'm always
Wow.
revamping. I'm always adding something. I'm always um, finding ways to make it relevant for this moment. So, like when I was last teaching, it was during the start of the war with Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
and students were asking me the question, why would people like my dad or grandpa who have no military training want to pick up a weapon that they've never used before to go fight a modern Russian army? Like, what compels them to do that as opposed to fleeing? Like, what makes it
Mm.
so important for them? What's ingrained? And when we look back at hello people, why it's important history to explain the evolution of Ukraine and the evolution of cultural identity and political identity and their relationship with the Russians or the Soviets of the past,
Mm.
it helps people understand why that father or grandfather or son or whomever who has no military training is going to pick up any weapon they can find and fight off the Russians.
Wow. That is fascinating. And I just have to say, I want to sit in your next class because when I think about my history classes, it seriously was the memorizing the dates. I remember filling up Blue Book. That's how long ago my history classes were, and writing out the stamp back was this and blah, blah. And it was really like going through the little file cabinet in my head. I couldn't tell you what it's all about now because I couldn't retain it.
Yeah.
But if I had been in the, let's say a colonial person's shoes, let's say during the Revolutionary
Mm-hmm.
War, how cool would that have felt? Or again, to apply it to people being oppressed today, that
Yes.
is that would make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really,
Wow.
and it's interesting too, because it's different institutions want different measures of assessment.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there are still blue books,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Wow.
And as someone, okay, so I have a dyslexic son. I probably have some dyslexia as well, because all through my high school and college years, I over prepared, over memorized, like worked really, really hard. I did well, thank goodness. I was
Mm-hmm.
lucky. And it wasn't as impactful as it is on my son, but I have test taking anxiety.
Mm.
So I try to make the test taking as empowering as possible for the student. And I do different types. So I have like short answer, long answer, and visual, right? So I always have a map, essay question, and short answer. And I give them everything ahead of time. I have an extensive study guide. I'm like, here's all the stuff, and I will pick from this. There are no tricks on my tests.
Mm.
My goal is for you to have time to prepare and gain mastery of the knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and then demonstrate your prowess to me on this test.
Wow.
And if you can't remember a date, tell me something that was near the date. Give me a decade. Give me a time frame. Give me an understanding of how you contextualize this bit of information. Because at the end of the day, you can look up that date on your phone in about 10 seconds. right? But
Right.
if you can
Right.
demonstrate to me that you understand what came before or after or why it's relevant or what its, context is, then you've done the work.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I to have some skin in the game is really what you're doing, as opposed to me cramming the night before to get all the facts in my head and then forgetting them as soon as the test is over.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. Like we had to regurgitate
Mhm.
and we would get marked off for everything we got, quote, wrong,
Right.
as opposed to I'm gaining mastery of this content and I'm going to demonstrate it to you in the best way I can. And some people are great writers, some people are mathematicians, some people are sciencey, some people are visual. Like you need to give them the canvas in which they can express their prowess to you with
Mm.
content that may or may not be of any interest to them.
Right. Wow. Have I mentioned you're amazing? I'm just gonna fangirl a little bit here if you don't mind.
Years of
Yeah.
experience of trial and error, right? But
Right.
that's really what I try to do. And the more fun for me is having students read information that might have counter arguments
Mm.
and saying, okay, so this historian is saying this and that historian is saying that. How do we
Mhm.
determine, how do they coexist? Right? They're looking at the same information or the same event or the same statistics, and they're making different kinds of arguments. How do you navigate that? How do you prioritize? How do you defend one point of view or the other? Which is what we do in life, right?
Mm.
Everyone has a point of view and we're defending it. And what I'm trying
Mhm.
to demonstrate to them is the opportunity to look at how someone else has argued a point, how someone has prioritized information or has um, interpreted it in a certain
Mhm.
way so that you can learn how to do that for yourself.
Yes. Yes, and even more importantly, which our politicians could take a lesson from, is to, even if you don't agree with the other side, the argument they're making, you can put yourself in their shoes or realize that, their opinion isn't wrong. I just don't happen to agree with it.
You can agree to disagree.
Yes, that is enormous.
Yes. And so I agree with you. If we can get our society to acknowledge the agree to disagree, that they're both valid
Mhm.
in general, right? This isn't a moral question.
Right, right, right.
This is sort of like a more academic, sort of like, okay, how should we spend the budget? Right?
Right, right,
We can
right.
agree to disagree, then that's the first step to compromise.
Yes. Yes.
So if you take the moral equation out of it, like you are absolutely wrong if you don't agree with me.
Mhm.
Therefore, I don't have to listen to your input. Therefore, I don't have to compromise. But if I can
Right.
agree to disagree with someone and see their point of view and say, okay, that's a priority for you, this is a priority for me. How can we meet in the middle somewhere
Yes. Will you
and
be
get
running in
something done?
yeah, so will you be running in 2024? Because that would be great. May I just say?
Yeah, it's so funny. I started my studies in revolutions. I was really curious about personal agency for the everyday person.
Mm.
There's a lot of history in the past has been written about the leaders and politicians, and in the 20th century there was a huge shift of social history, labor history, cultural history, women's history, all sorts of stuff. And so I was always interested, like, I'm just an everyday person, where's my agency, right? And
Mm.
in a society where I increasingly feel less and less agency
Mhm.
because my participation is either diluted, diminished, or doesn't have direct access to the consequences of decisions that are being made, say, for
Right.
example, in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why there's a whole movement, I think, with the younger generations about local, focus on local, because you can
Right.
make a change locally and then move that, grassroots, bottom up.
Yeah.
But the idea that times of revolution are opportunities for agency and change. And
Mm.
so originally I studied the American, the French, and the Soviet, or the Russian Revolution.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll say something that may be, I don't know how your listeners are going to feel about this, but the American Revolution was really a civil war with
Mm.
England. And the
Mm.
American Civil War was really our revolution.
Wow.
Because
I
the American
yes.
Revolution simply changed the leadership. It didn't change society that much.
Mm.
People who were in power remained in power. Social economics didn't shift too much. Things remained the same.
Mhm.
And we could go down a whole other path with, slaves being three-fourths human and the Constitution, all that stuff. And that's a whole other document to open up or
Yeah.
package to open up, right? But the Civil War actually enacted laws that shifted civil rights. Sadly,
Mm.
it took another 100 years to the 1960s for them to really be implemented and supported and protected.
Mm-hmm.
But the revolution really was during our Civil War.
Wow. Mind very happily blown. You're so right. Wow. So, what do you think is the most important thing to teach students at the college level in this day and age?
I love that question, Rachel. Thank you. I got to tell you, my whole teaching philosophy has shifted so much and grown so much thanks to my students.
Mm,
And I think the most important takeaway now is discernment.
mm,
How to discern from all the avenues of information that are being thrust upon or made available to young adults today.
mm,
So again, the sum of all human knowledge is in your hand, right?
mhm,
And you're in your smartphone or on Google or whatever it is you're using, whatever browser. Uh, how do you discern which sources are most reputable, valid, pertinent for what you're trying to understand,
mm,
right? And I
mhm,
would say like Wikipedia is a great resource. It's not peer reviewed, so it's not 100% accurate, but I use it too. Like you look up a quick date or you're looking up some images, or you're just getting some little bit of background. That's fantastic. I would never cite Wikipedia. I
mm,
would use my discernment to either look at their footnotes or go to other reputable sources. And so
mhm,
what I do is I try to teach the students to be confident in their discernment of what resources are useful to them in making their own arguments, judgments, perceptions, and opinions.
wow. I would argue that applies to adults as well, discernment.
On so many levels.
Well, it's interesting getting these kids who are kind of ready to be launched into the world. Teaching them discernment is so important because those of us who have been around for a few more decades, we are, let's see, our opinions are more ingrained, let's say, in our brain synapses. So it's harder to get that discernment, it seems like, when we've already lived these decades with this is my opinion and therefore it's right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, for a young person who has to write a history paper, right? Because that's part of what you do in a history class. And what I try to do is I teach skills that are not just for history; they're skills for everyday life.
Hmm.
So, okay, what's the first thing you're gonna do? You're gonna look online, or you're gonna go to the library website and you're gonna do a search. Like, how do you do the right kind of search to get what you need? How do you understand what's an exhaustive search? How do you know, oh, these three resources are enough? So once you get
Mm.
to those prioritization, how you discern within those resources if they're really fully realized, or if they are written in such a way that give you a broader sense of the material. That makes
Right.
sense?
Yeah,
Am I
it
being too
totally makes
abstract?
sense. No, no, it
So like
totally.
do you use a newspaper? Okay, well, if you're using a newspaper or any sort of news agency, you need to understand what their filter is. What is their
Right.
agenda? Because every news agency has an agenda, no matter how
Hmm.
much they claim to be objective. And that's okay. It's okay that they have an agenda. It's okay they have a point of view, right?
Hmm.
All the different like morning news shows all have a different point of view. They have a different
Yes.
feeling, a different style. That's okay.
Hmm.
But we as learners or educators or students just need to be aware of those filters. And I
Right.
think young people today have a high BS meter,
Yes. Yes.
right? Like
Hmm.
people doing all sorts of crazy content on TikTok and social media and all these other things. And although there are people that get sort of sucked in and just believe everything they see, which I don't think is 100% true, but there's that idea.
Hmm.
I think young people are very smart
Hmm.
about this kind of stuff. And I think they do understand that, oh, this person is trying to sell this product. I get it. And they may want to buy the
Right.
product because they like the person. That's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think there's an awareness, right? There's no, I think the wool has been lifted from everyone's eyes. I think we are
Hmm.
teaching our kids in a different way about
Hmm.
this. I think there's a lot of meta narrative happening about it.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Oh, I totally
right.
agree.
Right. And that's not to deny all the stuff that's going on, relationship wise and emotionally and all that other stuff. I'm just
Hmm.
talking about in terms of information.
Right, right. As you're talking, I'm picturing myself going to the card catalog and looking up the books in the library for the history paper, and how, in a way, the good thing about that was all that we had. So we had to just say, well, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. So we didn't have to wade through what the kids have to wade through now.
Exactly.
However, going back to how to interpret the world and how to drown out the noise, if you will, when you have to go through all these different pieces, newspapers, or, online newspapers, other search engines, etc. What a great life skill to be able to navigate all that information you're being bombarded with
Yes, yes, absolutely. And you
and
can,
then
and
interpret
even
it.
if you disagree with something, or you know that it's shaded in a way that is clearly presenting the facts in a very particular point of view, that's okay. You can still
Hmm.
ingest and read and appreciate what it is. Just know what the agenda is,
That is
what the
so
point of view is.
important. Yeah,
And you brought up a
because
great point, Rachel, because you said in our day, and we're not in walkers yet, but we did live before smartphones and the internet. Um, I remember a rotary phone.
right?
But when we had to do the same work that I'm asking my students to do today, there were limited sources and limited access to sources and
Hmm.
information. So it made our searches tighter. It was a
Yes.
smaller pool to swim in to figure this
Hmm.
out. And so I think that's why discernment is the key element to what I like to teach, because they have an unlimited ocean of information. And in fact, I
Yes.
often try to do my assignments in a way that say you need to have 2 books, 2 newspaper articles, like I try to give them the type of source
Mm.
and have them prioritize a limited number of those sources. So they don't
Hmm.
feel like they have to read 500. They just need to read 5 and pick the top 2, right? So that
Right.
they're not completely overwhelmed. And in one class, and in some assignments, there's no choice. I'm like, here are your 5 primary sources, or here are
Mm.
your 3 primary sources, and these 2 texts. Write a paper with that. And I've had so
Mm.
many students come up to me and say, "Oh my God, thank God!" Right?
Yeah.
I thank you for not requiring me to take all the material we have in class and expect me to figure it out outside of class on the internet. That I
Mm.
just need to have mastery of these things, and I need to analyze within this, which is, if I go on a sidebar here, it's kind of like English classes, right? So if you read a book and you're writing an interpretation or an analysis of something, a book, you're usually just using all the material you've read in that novel or whatever, nonfiction, whatever it is you're reading in English class.
Hmm.
And so it feels more manageable. What you're writing feels like it's your opinion. And it is,
Mm.
it's your opinion. It's how you feel about something. And you're using the evidence within that one source
Hmm.
to write about it,
Right.
and sometimes you're bringing in a little bit of outside information, but that's not the goal.
Hmm.
So in history, we're demanding a lot more. You're still writing a paper. You still have to have an argument. You still have to have evidence, but there's such a broad reach of what you
Right.
can choose from to fill that in. It is over freaking whelming. It's
Yeah.
overwhelming for me, and I know
Yeah.
how to do this,
Right.
right?
Yeah. I love that you're teaching um kids to look at something with whatever bent it comes with and say that's okay, and have that be part of what they are ingesting. Otherwise, it's so polarizing. Someone might say, I will never do research from such and such publication because I know they don't agree with my values or whatever it is. So the whole, you can read that thing and have that
You
be
see the
okay.
method to my madness.
Exactly. That is, you need to clone yourself, madam. Really?
I mean, that's leaning into agreeing to disagree. Like,
Yes.
it's okay that you don't prioritize that, but it's okay to read it. It's not going to contaminate you in some way.
And that's so huge. Oh, so you clearly love what you do. Your students love you as well. Can you tell us what you enjoy most about teaching at the college level?
Wow. It's such a privilege to teach college students
Mm.
these days. And I have to say, in my years and years of teaching, so long, that I get to learn something new pretty much every day.
Wow,
Yeah.
really?
Either they're bringing their world to me and I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that. Or, oh, that's a great way of looking at something. Or, oh, that's a great cultural reference that I might not
Mhm.
know, right? To how to
Mm.
like say, like I when I teach like troubadour poetry, or the 12th century Renaissance in Europe, which had an explosion of art and chivalry and all this stuff, I often will put up lyrics from contemporary songs
Oh,
and mix them in with the lyrics from the troubadour songs, so that they can
oh,
understand, like, if Beyonce's singing about wanting to get with her guy, it's the same thing as the troubadour saying, oh no, the morning lark has started singing, I don't want to leave your bed. Like, it's
yes.
this, like, so you're trying to, like, get, like, this is the equivalent of that.
Yes. Oh, that's so great. Yeah,
So
that
I
couldn't
learned
be
something
tough.
from them. I learned something from
Yeah.
them.
Oh, I love that.
Can I
Where
give
are
another
you?
example?
Please, please.
Okay, so one example blew my mind. Blew my mind. So I've been teaching primarily in civilian schools, and when you teach the first half of the course, or the early part, you're often having kids read Homer, right? And they
Mm,
often read the Odyssey, and there's lots of different snippets in the Odyssey, and there's a couple of famous ones. One is when when Odysseus is trying to get home after the Battle of Troy. Um, the Odyssey is after the Trojan War. Odysseus is trying to get home to his wife Penelope, and it takes him 10 years to get back because he has all these misadventures along the way. And one of the misadventures is there's an island of sirens, these beautiful women singing these songs, and sailors hear the song, and they can't help themselves, and they crash their ships onto their rocks, and they're taken by the sirens, and they die. And then there's another one where there's these two monsters in the ocean, and they have to get around them, and it's very tricky to get your boats around them, but there's ways you can do it. And Odysseus is sort of celebrated for finding a way to listen to the sirens. And
mm.
how he does it is he has his crew tie him to the mast very tightly. And he tells them, no matter what I say, don't untie me. And then he puts wax in all of the crew's ears so that they don't hear the siren and row towards the rocks. And so he goes by and he hears the sirens and he gets by and his boat is safe, right? And
Mm-hmm.
everyone kind of thinks that Odysseus is a badass for doing this. Wow, you gamed the system, you hacked it, you found a way to listen. Well, I had the privilege of teaching at the United States Naval Academy last year, and it was such a lovely experience. And I'm so proud of all of our men that serve, men and women that serve our country. And it was an exceptional opportunity for me, and I was grateful to have it. What was so astonishing to me is that they said, yeah, that's not a good captain. I don't want to sail with him. And I was like, what? My little Scooby Doo was like, what? I was like, this is not what I'm expecting from this discussion. And they said, from their perspective, here's a captain who was selfish. He made no effort to make sure that everyone on the ship had the same experience as he did. He made no effort to make sure that all of them were safe. He also put them at risk.
Right.
Right. His
Wow.
and there's another part to the story. There's that when he has to go through the two uh, uh, monsters in the sea, he goes downstairs to put on his armor when he's been advised not to. And as a result of him going downstairs to put on his armor, 6 sailors die. He's like,
Mm,
he let his crew die because he didn't
mm.
follow the advice was given. So they did not think Odysseus was a good captain. Learn
Wow.
something new every day, and perspective
Right.
and context matter,
Yes,
right?
it does. That is so fantastic.
I loved it.
Wow. There's a dissertation just on that right there, you know? Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that. That is super cool. Now, you have created and led immersive programs for students in other countries, France in particular. Why do you think it's important to expose young people to cultures outside their own communities and countries? And how can this experience be beneficial to them later in life?
Rachel, I love that question too. So I think many of our listeners probably travel as well. And I think any of us who've had the good fortune to travel know that when you get to experience someone else's culture,
Mm,
you develop an understanding.
mhm,
You get to walk in their shoes a little bit. And hopefully that leads to a degree of empathy. And
mm,
I think, understanding someone else's perspective, we're
mhm.
calling it culture, is important to understand why people make the decisions they make. and why they choose what they choose to do. So in politics, I think it's incredibly important. From a
Yeah.
humanity level, it's important. And what's also interesting too, I don't know if you find this, is that, the world has gotten a lot smaller with technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? All
Mm-hmm.
these different posts and opportunities you can research on your own, or you're just on your passive posting, watching Instagram or Facebook or something. You're seeing and learning about other cultures as you go. For me, when I was taking students for these immersive experiences, and I called them like, strolling lectures, right? So I'd take a group and I'd walk them around Paris, to cover a certain time period or certain set of experiences and say, okay, this is where this happened. Here's this building, let's go inside of it. Here's some food.
Yeah.
Why is this
Yeah.
important?
Uh-huh.
Um, you know, that these experiential learning opportunities are very dynamic because they use all five senses, right?
Mm-hmm.
But understanding another person's culture, I think, is the greatest gift we can give to ourselves and to each other as global citizens in an increasingly smaller world that we live in, and that interacts with so many more people than you or I ever had when we were young and growing up.
Oh, for sure. And I always think it's so good to show kids you're in another country, but look, they're the same people. People are people. They're not speaking the
Yes.
same language. Their hair might be a different color, or whatever. They might practice something differently. Just people. And that's such a,
Yes.
because I think people think, oh, wherever it is, it's so far away, they must be so different. It's like, nope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I love that, Rachel. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also have said many times that when our worlds get super small, like during COVID, and we were all
Yes.
isolated and our own problems in our head become magnified. That's all we keep thinking about. And then when you
Mm,
go out somewhere and you say, oh, look at that, those people don't have shoes to wear. It's like,
yeah. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I love kind of broadening the mind by being somewhere else and seeing A, they're just like us, and B, wow, can I be grateful or whatever it is.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
wow. So you also, another hat you wear is working
Whoa.
as a historian for authors and filmmakers. Can you tell us a little
Yes.
bit about what that entails? So cool. And why is historical accuracy vital for the content that goes out to the public? Because as it may not have been so accurate before, I'm thinking.
Well, you know what? This fell into my lap,
Hmm.
these opportunities, and I'm so, so grateful for it. Okay, so a couple of things. In a role, my perspective of being a historical consultant is I am here to serve the writer.
Mm,
So if the writer is striving for historical accuracy, I try to give that person the confidence to know that these are the facts and here's the parameter in which you can play.
mm.
What I enjoy even more is if the writer is trying to figure out how wide the sandbox is.
Go on.
So, like I'll give a small example. So, the story of Napoleon, right? Not everybody knows what Napoleon did, but before he became Napoleon, he was a general in the army and he was in different places. And at one point, he is stuck in Egypt, and his team, his girlfriend and his followers and supporters don't know if he's going to survive. Don't know if he's going to come back to France. And we as historians know he sneaks away, he gets back, and goes on to have this massive career. And so by articulating to the writer, you know what? In this moment when these characters are talking, we know Napoleon's coming back, but they do not.
Ah,
So you
right.
can play in that moment and do whatever you want to do because they as people in real life don't really know what's going to happen.
Oh, that's
So
so
it gives them
cool.
creative freedom,
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Wow, I love that. Oh my gosh, that's I love that.
And
It's
there's some
and
intricacies with like clothing too, like fashions change in certain times. And so like designing a scene, especially a scene with women and they're helping each other get dressed or they're getting ready for a party, like some of the curious things that would have happened. Like there's a period in French history where like they would wear these muslin dresses and would wet them down to show their body, and then they'd wear like a giant pashmina to sort of quote be demure, but it was
Oh,
in vogue in the moment to be
right.
trendy, sort of like when the girls were all like uncrossing their legs,
Yeah,
getting out
yeah,
of cars, right?
yeah,
Like you're like, why would you do that? I don't
right.
know, it's the trend right now. Now we're in underwear, but like, so it gives them like these funny little moments that are sort of forgotten in history, but they're cute, they're interesting little facts. So you
Hmm.
can go like see which characters would do it, which characters wouldn't. Right. So
Wow.
you can play a little bit with some historical accuracy to push forward characterizations within the plot.
That's super cool. And I think when we as the viewers see it, we may not, know that fact, but we're picking it up just from watching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
what a
for me,
great
it's really
job.
fun and creative.
Yeah. Well,
Any
you
listeners out there need a historical consultant? I'm
have
your gal.
I will
DM Rachel.
please, yes. Um, you have studied history for so many years. What have you learned on a personal level from all of the history going back, as far as we can tell? What have you learned as a person, mom, friend, teacher?
If I were to sum it up in one word, I would say compassion. I've
Mm,
learned a lot more compassion by looking at history and what different groups of people have gone through. I also, not to oversimplify it, because it's not this simple, but we are struggling with the same basic issues that our previous generations struggled with. We just have different technology and resources to try to address them.
mm,
Everyone's still trying to survive,
mm-hmm,
put food on the table,
mm-hmm,
have shelter, and navigate the society in which they find themselves.
mm.
And we can look across
Wow.
the globe right now because there's a lot of inequities in how that happens all over the world today. So you don't actually have to go back in history. You can actually just look at contemporary society to see how are different communities, how are different individuals trying to navigate doing those basic things. And we
So
just have
I
different resources and technologies to do it in different spaces around the world.
I feel like we haven't learned from history then. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Learn from history?
Uh, we do. I think we do. Like, I think, I think we do learn from history. I'm a pragmatic optimist. I think there's always hope and opportunity moving forward, and I believe in the future generations.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Again, sometimes radically different cultures between the generations,
Mhm. Right.
but each generation has something to contribute and to try to understand how to navigate these same issues in their own way.
Mm.
Um, I forgot the question.
I was just saying, like, we're going through the same
Oh,
stuff,
we don't seem like we remember history.
right, right, right.
I think we do. Like, we will never let anyone on an airplane do that again from 9/11.
Yes,
No one will ever
that's
let that happen again,
that's very
ever.
true. Mhm.
We are very much aware of what Putin is doing in Ukraine and the Crimea
Mhm.
earlier. And there
Yeah.
were a lot of parallels to what had happened pre-World War II.
Mhm.
Um, we are doing slightly different actions as a world.
Mhm.
We are not going full out to address that issue for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
But there is an awareness, and I think it would be. I hope that the Holocaust would never happen again.
Mhm.
Right. I think
Right.
that I think history serves an immensely important purpose there. I think
Yes.
the narratives and like Steven Spielberg and the Museum of Tolerance here in Los Angeles have worked very hard to capture all of the stories from any survivor,
Mhm.
to have a catalog of this and to find ways to teach humanity, to teach the Holocaust. It's not just about the Holocaust, but of other Holocausts and other um, um, genocides happening around the world.
Mhm. Right. Yes. That's true. And that does make me hopeful. And I'm very thankful to have teachers like you teaching the young people truly about, being not being so polarized and agreeing to disagree. And I feel like that's the only way, at least today, that we can really move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And find compassion.
Find
You know, if
compassion.
we have compassion, then some of these horrors can't happen.
Oh, so true. Beautifully put. Thank you so much for this wonderful part one with the amazing Courtney Spikes.
The
Stay
amazing
tuned.
Rachel
Oh,
Cole.
thank you.
I'm
Stay
so glad you
tuned.
asked me.
Oh my gosh, I am honored. Stay tuned for part 3. We'll be back.